Nurse Radio Podcasts.
Welcome to the APRN Pipeline podcast with Professor Garcia.
Welcome back to Nurse Radio Podcasts. I am your host, Professor Garcia, and in this episode of the APRN Pipeline, we're going to move further up the mountain model of practice change. Now that you've framed your PPCO question and set your SMART aims in episode 2, it's time to hunt for the highest quality evidence and learn how to appraise it. We're diving into chapters 3 through 7 of the 2026 textbook entitled Leading Evidence-Based Practice and Quality Improvement Initiatives in Advanced Nursing Practice by editors Waldrop and Dunlap. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by a PubMed search, this episode is for you. On today's episode, we're going to go over the power of information literacy, why being an APRN leader means moving beyond Google and mastering databases like PubMed, CINAHL, and Cochrane. We're going to master the search strategy as we break down Boolean operators like and, or not, to help you build a precise search that filters out the noise. We're going to learn why a study sitting at the top of the evidence hierarchy, like an RCT, just isn't enough. You must appraise its validity, reliability, and applicability to your specific clinic. We'll clarify one more time a major student pain point, like understanding why a p-value matters for research. But clinical significance is what drives evidence-based practice quality improvement. We'll finish up with why qualitative research is essential for understanding the patient experience and establishing trustworthiness through credibility and transferability. But before we let you go, we can't forget how to appraise other evidence, including clinical practice guidelines. We'll continue our journey with our primary care clinical example. And while you listen, you'll learn how to move from a broad search on flu vaccines to a synthesized evidence table that gives us the green light to implement a standing order protocol supported by the best available evidence. Remember, don't build your PIP project on a shaky foundation of evidence. Today, join the conversation as we learn how to sort through the evidence and perform our critical appraisals. Let's keep moving up the mountain together. Nurse Radio Podcasts. Let's get started. So you might wonder, how do we demonstrate leadership while searching for evidence? Let's return to our clinical example from episode 2 on improving adult flu vaccination rates in a primary care clinic. We know our clinic was at a 42% vaccination rate, and our SMART aims were to increase that by 15% in 6 months using a standing order protocol. Now, we need to find the evidence to support that specific change. As an APRN, you aren't just Googling anymore. You are a leader in information literacy. According to the authors, Carter Templeton et al., from the chapter entitled The Leadership Role of the Advanced Nurse in Searching for Evidence, they state, information literacy, a key to providing care based on evidence, involves finding information and critically appraising, synthesizing, and applying it. You need to use databases like PubMed, CINAHL, and the Cochrane Library in your practice improvement projects. And to do this effectively, we can use our PPCO terms as keywords. Looking back at our vaccine project example, P for population was adults. P for problem was low flu vaccination. C for change was standing orders. And O for outcome was vaccination rates. We combine these using what the book calls Boolean operators. If we search flu vaccine and standing orders, the database only gives us articles for both. But if we use or, it widens the net. Continuing on from the text, the same authors state librarians are experts in information literacy and can provide vital assistance in searching and retrieving various types of evidence. Consulting a librarian can save you significant time and produce valuable information. So, what do you think about this? Leave a comment below to let me know whether or not you've used a librarian when constructing your search strategy. Nurse Radio Podcasts. Let's keep going. Okay, you've done your search and found a landmark study on standing orders. It turns out to be a randomized control trial, RCT. Remember, this sits at the top of the evidence pyramid because it minimizes bias. So, how do we appraise it? According to the authors Waldrop et al., from the chapter entitled Leading Critical Appraisal of Quantitative Evidence, they state critical appraisal is the process of carefully and systematically examining research to judge its trustworthiness and its value and relevance in a particular context. When looking at our vaccination RCT, we can ask three big questions. First, reliability. Can this be duplicated? Second, validity. Did the researchers actually measure what they say they would? Third, applicability. Would this work in my clinic? Nurse Radio Podcasts. Let's keep going. Here is a trap many students fall prey to: statistical versus clinical significance. A study might say that standing orders increased vaccination by 2%, and it was statistically significant. The p value was less than 0.05. But as a nurse, you need to ask yourself, is a 2% increase clinically significant for your clinic's 15% goal? Let's go back to the evidence and the same chapter where the authors state evidence-based practice quality improvement teams should closely look and thoughtfully assess significance types. Clinical significance occurs when a patient's experience or health parameters are improved. Okay, I want you to leave me a comment below on what you found in the evidence base and whether or not you think it would ever work in your clinic or hospital setting. Let's keep going. Next, let's look at qualitative evidence. See, numbers tell you what happened, but qualitative evidence tells you why. Maybe you find a study that interviewed patients about why they refused the flu shot. Now let's look at the chapter entitled Leading Critical Appraisal of Qualitative Evidence by authors Lockwood et al. The authors state, while quantitative methods analyze objective data, qualitative methods look at the subjective data. The objective is to transfer insights from patterns in human experience to inform how people experience a phenomenon. Remember, in qualitative work, we don't look for validity, we look for trustworthiness, which includes credibility and confirmability. Now, let's apply this to our example of flu shots. We might find a qualitative study that reveals that patients at many clinics are afraid of side effects. However, the qualitative study also showed that these fears were diminished when patients received an educational flyer that described the process. This is an example of the evidence in evidence-based practice. Nurse Radio Podcasts. Let's keep going. Next, let's look at a third type of evidence, which is just as important: guidelines and experts. Look, sometimes you won't find a perfect RCT. And that's okay. We have other evidence like clinical practice guidelines and expert opinion. According to the authors Waldrop et al., from the chapter entitled leaving the appraisal of other types of evidence to inform best practices. The authors state clinical practice guidelines provide the highest level of evidence and are the most trustworthy among clinical practice recommendations because A, they are systematically developed with transparent methods, and B, the strength of the recommendation is graded. Let's go back to our vaccination project. The CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, also known as ACIP, has recommendations that serve as the gold standard for clinical practice guidelines. We can appraise these using a tool called Agree To make sure that the guideline itself was developed rigorously. We might even look at Squire 2.0 reports, which are published results of other evidence-based practice quality improvement projects similar to ours. If another clinic successfully used standing orders, their lessons learned can be invaluable to us. Leave me a comment below to let me know what clinical practice guidelines you're turning to in your practice improvement project. Nurse Radio Podcasts, let's keep going. All right, you've begun sifting through the evidence and you've gathered your quantitative RCT, your qualitative interview study, and your CDC guidelines. Now is when you begin to synthesize. What this means is you put them into an evidence table or matrix. This isn't just a list, it's a comparison. You look for strong and compelling evidence with consistent results. Guess what? If all your sources agree that standing orders increase rates, you have the green light and you can move on to the next step of your project. Implementation. Nurse Radio Podcasts, wrapping up. Let's talk about what we learned today. We learned how to search using Boolean operators, how to distinguish statistical from clinical significance. We learned why qualitative trustworthiness matters and why clinical practice guidelines provide the highest level of evidence and are the most trustworthy among clinical practice recommendations. Our vaccination project now has a solid foundation of evidence. We now know what to do, standing orders, how to address patient fears by using educational flyers based on our qualitative data, and what the national standards are based on CDC guidelines. Now, I want you to apply this to your very own practice improvement projects. And in episode 4, we'll go deeper into incorporating patient preference into evidence-based practice, because evidence without the patient's voice isn't truly evidence-based practice. We'll also discuss the best methods for measuring improvements in quality improvement, so you can demonstrate that your project worked. Signing off, I am Professor Garcia, and this has been episode 3 of the APRN Pipeline. Keep questioning, keep searching, and keep improving.